You are now listening to On One Radio, the talk show podcast station, bringing you the realest entertainment, information, music, lifestyle, and truth and comedy shows around. This is Let's Talk. I don't count likes, calories, blessings. I don't dine with snakes or bite my tongue. It is what it is. I am what I am. I am your host, Tony Williams. Welcome everyone. Welcome if you're a new listener. Thank you for being here. Shout out to my own ones, day ones, who's been riding with me since day one. Big shout out to y'all over there with private Facebook group, On Ones, Day Ones. If you're not in that group, check it out. That's where you can find all your information about upcoming shows and everything like that. All the latest behind the scenes stuff that be going down. It's all there. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you can stay in the know of upcoming episodes. Now, I'm bringing to you a special report. Child abuse, or is it? Now, there's a lot going on with that. There's a lot of parents who've been through situations to where they were accused of child abuse, but it wasn't. And then there are cases where there is child abuse, but the state does nothing about it until it's too late. So it's important that I feel we talk about this. So here's your special report. The doctors diagnosis, child abuse. It wasn't, but the state took the baby anyway. After 4-month-old Tristan suffered a seizure, a doctor at a Houston hospital said she believed the baby had been shaken, and the state took emergency custody. It took months for Tristan's parents, Anne Marie and Tim Timmerman, to get him back. All it took was one doctor's opinion, and it almost destroyed my family, Tim Timmerman said. Child abuse pediatricians aim to protect vulnerable children, but an investigation revealed that some have also implicated parents who appear to have credible claims of innocence, leading to traumatic family separations and questionable criminal charges. Now, we all know that can be devastating, and that's one that no parent wants to go through. Now, for those who are abusing their children, then those charges need to be filed. So let's dive in a little bit further. In Houston, a panicked voice jolted Anne Marie Timmerman awake around 3 a.m. There's something wrong with Tristan. Her husband Tim stood over her, wide-eyed, holding their 4-month-old boy. Tim had been sitting up with the baby in another room, letting his nursing wife catch up on sleep. Now the infant was limp in his arms, pupils rolling back in his head. My baby's dying, Anne Marie thought as she jumped out of her bed that night, more than 3 years ago. No time for an ambulance. She yanked on a pair of pants, grabbed the child, and got into her car while Tim stayed behind with their 2 older boys. As Anne Marie sped down the highway, one hand on the wheel, the other pressing her baby to her chest, she prayed out loud, "God, please, don't take him from me." Tristan had been their miracle baby, born healthy after doctors diagnosed with autoimmune disorder and warned she might not be able to have a third child. Now, as she ran barefoot into an emergency room in Katy, Texas, she was afraid she might lose him. She was right. It would turn out, but not in the way she had feared. A day later, after Tristan was taken by ambulance 30 minutes away to Children's Memorial Hermann Hospital in Houston, a string of specialists cycled through his room. A radiologist scanned his brain, another doctor examined his eyes, then a neurosurgeon delivered good news. Tristan had a tiny brain bleed, Dr. David Sandberg said, possibly the consequence of a head injury that babies sometimes suffer during childbirth. It probably would resolve in a few days, he explained, and Tristan was safe to go home. Anne-Marie cried with relief as she and Tim awaited discharge papers. But soon another doctor entered Tristan's room and told the Timmermans she had reached a far different conclusion. Dr. Rebecca Girardet said it appeared that Tristan also had suffered bleeding in his eyes, and because of that, she wanted a more detailed brain scan. When Anne-Marie protested, the doctor explained herself. I believe that he may have been shaken, Girardet said, according to her notes, shocking the Timmermans into silence. They didn't know it at the time, but Girardet is not a typical pediatrician. She is a leading figure in a relatively small but growing subspecialty of doctors who practice a rare blend of medicine and forensics, relying on medical imaging, witness interviews, and past experience to diagnose not only a child's condition, but also what caused it. Unbeknownst to many parents who encountered them, these pediatricians, now stationed at virtually every major children's hospital in the county, work closely with child welfare agencies and law enforcement, providing expert reports and court testimony in thousands of cases a year and helping to shield untold numbers of abused children from additional harm. But in their zeal to protect children, some child abuse pediatricians also have implicated parents who appear to have credible claims of innocence, leading to traumatic family separations and questionable criminal charges. An investigation found. Even critics acknowledge that the doctor's conclusions are likely correct most of the time, particularly in cases where children have suffered extensive unexplained injuries. But when the evidence is less clear, a diagnosis of child abuse can devastate families, often with long-term consequences. Because records of child welfare investigations are confidential, there is no way of knowing how often parents lose custody, temporarily or otherwise, based on the opinion of a child abuse doctor. So you got to be careful out there. There are child abuse doctors who sometimes get it wrong. Reporters for this series spent 9 months examining more than 40 such cases in Texas, a state that provides $5 million in grants each year, including $2.5 million from the agency that oversees Child Protective Services to support the work of these physicians, deputizing them to review cases on behalf of child welfare investigators. Reporters scrutinized thousands of pages of court transcripts, government contracts, and medical records. They spoke with more than 75 attorneys and doctors and interviewed 24 current and former Child Protective Services employees and union officials. The reporting reveals a legal and medical system that sometimes struggles to to differentiate accidental injuries from abuse, particularly in cases involving children too young to describe what happened to them. Physicians intent on protecting the most vulnerable in some instances have overstated the reliability of their findings, using terms such as 100% and certain to describe conclusions that usually cannot be proven with absolute confidence. Child welfare workers, overworked and untrained in complex medical issues, are not always sure how to proceed when the primary evidence against a caregiver comes in the form of a doctor's note. Now, under this system, children are sometimes taken from seemingly caring parents, while others are left in situations that, in rare cases, turn out to be deadly. So you really have to be careful, even with small incidents and situations. You have to be on guard because we don't want anyone to be caught up in this type of situation. It's hard enough, the struggle to deal with what your child is going through, and the added pressure of you being labeled as a child abuser, and just trickling down from there. I mean, it's hard to imagine being in that situation. I've never had to deal with things like that, so I thank God for that. But I know there's parents out there, and this story is an eye-opener because it reveals just how much of a thin line it is, that it truly is. Now, parents managed to regain custody in most of the cases reviewed by reporters. In some instances, after additional medical findings or reports from outside experts raised doubts about the initial abuse determination. Pardon me. Nevertheless, some parents lost jobs or faced financial ruin as a result of their fights with Child Protective Services, and a few children emerged from foster care suffering from depression or other health issues. In a few instances, caregivers were charged criminally or had their parental rights permanently terminated, despite questions about the doctor's findings in their cases. And among the cases, 3-month-old Zoe Grant's parents didn't know what caused the bruise on her bottom, and since it was an injury the baby could sustain on her own, a state-backed child abuse pediatrician in Dallas reported the mark as abuse, failing to mention that it was the parents who first noticed the injury and brought the child in for an examination, worried she may have been hurt at daycare. Armed with the doctor's report, Child Protective Services workers showed up with emergency removal orders and placed little Zoe, and an older sibling in foster care. It's crazy. But it happens, it's clear. Short drops don't usually cause serious head injuries, so when 5-month-old Mason Bright arrived at Houston Emergency Room with 2 skull fractures and subdural bleeding, a doctor in training to become a child abuse pediatrician concluded that the injuries would not have resulted from an accidental fall in the driveway, as his mother insisted. A later test revealed that the boy may have suffered from a clotting disorder that helped explain the excessive bleeding. And another medical expert pointed out that it's possible to suffer multiple skull fractures from a single short fall. But that didn't stop Child Protective Services from taking the boy and his older sister. In another case, grandparents in East Texas lost custody of their grandchildren and were sentenced to 25 years in prison based largely on the opinion of a child abuse pediatrician who told authorities that, based on the pattern of burns on a child who's been scalded in a bathtub, he could determine with certainty, without even knowing the water temperature or other variables, whether the injuries were accidental or inflicted. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned the couple's conviction in 2016 after concluding that the doctor did not base his opinion on the particular facts of the case. Hospitals have long employed doctors with a special interest in child abuse, but it wasn't until a decade ago that the American Board of Pediatrics certified a new medical subspecialty dedicated to protecting children. Now, the goal was to standardize the process for assessing suspicious injuries, reducing the risk of both missing abuse and over-reporting it, the doctors say. Today, about 375 child abuse pediatricians practice throughout the U.S., including about 20 in Texas. Running total of child abuse pediatricians nationally. In 2009, there were a little under 200. 2011, a little under 300. 2013, a little over 300. 2015, 378. 2017, we're right at 400. Both law, all doctors are required to report to authorities when they suspect a child may have been abused. Child abuse pediatricians go further. They then investigate and work to confirm whether abuse has occurred. Officially, the doctors have no authority to take children from parents, but in practice, their reports can carry extraordinary weight. Current and former Child Protective Service employees in Texas told reporters that opinions from child abuse pediatricians sometimes drive their investigations. 3 former supervisors said they at times doubted the conclusions of agency-funded physicians, but facing pressure to close cases quickly and avoid the potential liability of dismissing a doctor's warning, 2 of them said they sought to remove children or knew of others who did, despite lingering doubts. In interviews, child abuse pediatricians acknowledge that a mistaken diagnosis can result in a child being taken from caring parents, but overlooking warning signs, they said, could lead to an even worse outcome. Nationally, nearly 1,700 children died of abuse or neglect in 2017, according to the Children's Bureau of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Texas led the country with 186 deaths that year, at a rate slightly higher than the national average. In total, about 10,000 Texas children are identified as victims of physical abuse or medical neglect annually. An estimated 1,688 children died from abuse and neglect nationally in fiscal year 2017. The rate of children killed in Texas was slightly higher than the national average. The U.S. average in 2017 was 2.32 deaths per 100,000 children. Now that's a high number, and it tends to get worse. Now that we're in 2019, the numbers have grown. And going into 2020, who knows what the numbers are going to be. And it's sad that we have to go through this. And although most children abuse pediatricians are labeled heroic because of their willingness to advocate on behalf of vulnerable children, a lot of people are not so with that, too quick to label a child's injuries abusive, blinding them in some instances to more benign explanations. That happens far too often. And then there are so many children that go abused and nothing happens. But yet we have all these parents who are being charged and losing their jobs and everything else. I mean, their whole lives are being dramatically changed. And for what? And the people who are abusing their children, unfortunately, some of the children end up dying. And then some parents end up behind bars. And we still have some parents that are not behind bars when it has been clearly child abuse. Now, the Timmermans were stunned that day in May by Girodet's suggestion that Tristan had been abused. Anne-Marie recalled turning to her husband. "You didn't shake him, did you?" Tim, speechless, mustered only a shrug before later denying he had intentionally harmed the child. He'd fallen asleep holding the baby. Tim explained after he woke with a start, he found Tristan in bed next to him, seemingly in distress. Tristan cannot be allowed to go home with a caregiver who may have shaken him, Girodet wrote in the baby's medical record minutes after the encounter. For the Timmermans, the exchange marked the informal start of a 7-month battle to save their family. Within hours, before any additional medical testing had been completed, a state investigator for Child Protective Services encountered the hospital room and informed them that the agency was taking emergency custody of Tristan. Anne-Marie's father recorded their conversation with the investigator and shared the audio reports. So we'll take a moment to listen to that.
We would never hurt this baby. I mean, this baby's my life. I mean, he's absolutely my miracle baby. Like, they told me I couldn't have another baby, and I had him. And we would never hurt this baby. Oh, please don't remove my baby. Please.
Does she have?
Please don't remove my baby.
Okay.
Please.
She can always come to court. They have to go to court tomorrow at 1:30. I want to get all of you guys' names. I already was aware.
No, please don't.
Okay.
Please don't remove
No,
my baby.
we're not. I can't do that.
I'm scared. Please. I am so scared right now. I mean, I'm breastfeeding him. I'm with him all the time. He's my life. He's everything to me. Like, my kids are my life.
That is a shame. That really is a shame. That mother was pleading for her baby. For her miracle baby. And because the doctor, this subspecialty doctor, got it wrong, that has got to be very hurtful. They pleaded with the investigator to talk to Sandberg, the neurosurgeon who seemed to believe Tristan was fine. The investigator said nobody at the hospital had mentioned the doctor to her, and there's no indication in hundreds of pages of records released to the Timmermans that the agency ever contacted him. Girodet and Sandberg, both professors at UT Health's McGovern Medical School in Houston, declined through a spokeswoman to be interviewed. The Timmermans signed a privacy waiver freeing doctors to comment on their case, but they declined to do so. The medical school spokeswoman instead directed reporters to public remarks Geradet made in March while testifying before a committee of the Texas House of Representatives about a bill that would have required Child Protective Services to seek a second doctor's opinion before removing children in some instances. Geradet cited a 2016 study she conducted showing that state-funded child abuse pediatricians in Texas ruled out or failed to confirm abuse in nearly half of the cases they examined on behalf of Protective Services from mid-2012 to mid-2014. This is because child abuse pediatricians are not only experts in diagnosing child maltreatment, Geradet said at the hearing, we're also experts in diagnosing conditions that can mimic child maltreatment. Rather than rely on an orthopedist to scrutinize suspicious fractures, a neurologist to scrutinize suspicious head injuries, or a burn specialist to scrutinize suspicious scalding injuries, child abuse pediatricians say they examine a complete picture of a child's condition to draw their conclusions. It's wow. I mean, this has been going on a while and it's not ceasing. And when I come across more information on this, I will definitely let you guys know. The families that have been involved in cases like this, I feel for them. I pray for them. Ultimately, state child welfare agencies are left with the difficult task of determining when the risk to a child's safety is significant enough to take children from their family. The policy had been amended. Its internal policy, that is, instructing investigators to give even more weight to opinions issued by state-funded child abuse pediatricians. They did get baby Tristan back, but it was a battle for them, and it's an ongoing battle for a lot of parents. When the new report comes out, I will definitely give you guys an update, so stay tuned for that. The Timmermans were more fortunate because the Harris County Sheriff's Office, pardon me, investigated but did not file criminal charges. And they were able to get their baby back. So that, for that couple, that was a seemingly happy ending, though the whole experience was traumatic. And like I said, I will be back when I have more information on what's going on, and I'm going to do some more research on this to run the numbers and everything for this year and last year and going into 2020 on this, because this is an important topic and there's so much going on with this sort of thing. And I mean, it's heartbreaking, to say the least, to see families who go through this, who do not abuse their children, but yet see children getting abused or hearing of children getting abused and the parents or guardians or whoever are not being charged. It needs an overhaul. It really does. Child welfare does need an overhaul. CPS, and this is every state. Every state's department need an overhaul. They need to go through a lot of these cases and review these cases to make sure what was declared was actually right. So thank you guys for listening, and I will be back with an update on this when I get it. But take care of your children, be aware, and be careful. Take care of each other, and as always, stay beautiful, stay blessed, take care of each other, and try to have a wonderful day. You have been listening to On One Radio, the talk show podcast station, bringing you the realest information, entertainment, music, lifestyle, and truth and comedy shows around. You have been listening to Let's Talk. I have been your host, Tony Williams. Like, share, follow, and subscribe for raw, uncut truth that is On One Radio.